welcome those who join us via the YouTube video, the Moorhead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying through the book of Job. Tonight we'll be studying through Job chapter 30. So if you want to be turning there to follow along, that would be a good thing. Appreciate you joining us on the video. Hope that the study will be encouraging to you. Just a quick summary of chapter 29. By this time, Job's three friends are done giving any speeches. They have tried everything they could in order to convince Job that the reason why he's going through great suffering is because he must have sinned in a great way and not repented of his sin. And they have tried to tell Job multiple times that all he needs to do is repent, and then all of his suffering will go away, and God will bless him once again. Well, Job was a man from the beginning of the book that we find out was a man of integrity. He was a man that was righteous. In other words, the problem wasn't that Job had sinned against God, but there was something bigger going on, and that was that to show Satan that he was absolutely wrong about the righteous and why they would follow God. But let's go to that summary in chapter 29. Now Job alone will go into his speeches. As we see here in Job 29, Job speaks of how things once were before great suffering came upon him. Things were really great. Job was happy. He was well respected in his community. People listened when he spoke to them because he spoke to them as a wise man. He helped others, and he was prosperous, and life was good. Chapter 30, we will find that Job will now contrast his former life with his present condition, his present situation in which he is in great suffering. And so Job's whole world has now been turned upside down. With that, Ryan, would you like to read the first 8 verses, please?
But now those younger than I mock me, whose fathers I disdained to put with the dogs of my flock. Indeed, what good was the strength of their hands to me? Vigor had perished from them. From want and famine they are gaunt, who gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation, who pluck mallow by the bushes, and whose food is the root of the broom shrub. They are driven from the community. They shout against him as against a thief, so that they dwell in dreadful valleys, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Among the bushes they cry out. Under the nettles they are gathered together. Fools, even those without a name, they were scourged from the land.
All right. So we're looking at this and from verse to verse here, and again in verse 1, Job says, but now those younger than I mock me. Now he's talking about his present situation, whose fathers I disdain to put with the dogs of my flock. And so the idea is that Job now goes from a place where he was once respected, once revered by the young and the old, to this present time when now he is mocked. The idea of being laughed at and held in contempt. In ancient culture, of course, the aged were esteemed and were held in high honor by society. Seniors were those who had life experience, and they were a benefit to younger generations with their knowledge and wisdom, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, is this literally happening, or is this kind of like he's just saying, like, I'm really in a bad state? Because, like, I didn't think he went out a lot because he was, in all the suffering and anguish and not getting sleep. So,
yeah.
Like, does everybody know that he's, like, got, the boils and the...
Well, yeah, they would certainly know that. Remember, he was sitting in ashes and, all this, so he's trying to rest. He's in ashes, at least during the day. It's really a pitiful situation. And as we look at this, and this sort of unravels, as we're talking about really some younger folks, younger people than he is, that have been outcast of society. So it's supposed that Job is outside of the city. He's sitting in ash. And here's these outcasts of the city. And because they're outcasts, because really the city dwellers do not want them to be in their midst, these guys essentially have targeted Job. And this is really who we're talking about here. So they're not the cream of the crop. In fact, they're a lot less than that. Job is showing how different things are now, and really showing that instead of enjoying respect, he is being disrespected time and time again. This is shocking and disheartening to be treated this way by them, but yet this is the new normal. And remember, Job knows he's not a sinner. In other words, this is undeserved. This is outrageous. This is just, this is unthinkable that people would treat somebody like myself in this way. And so they're doing so, remember, because, Job himself finds himself put outside of the circle of people too, because if everybody has the same theology, suffering equals sin, the idea is that people are backing away from Job, and he really doesn't have any friends. And even his friends aren't really there for him. They're there to sort of tell him how things are, but they're not really there for to support him in his situation. The second phrase here, whose fathers I disdained to put with the dogs of my flock. This is talking about the fathers of those younger people that were outcasts of society. We'll get more into that. But the idea here, when we look at this, is first of all, I should say, he's talking about the dogs of my flock. Now, the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon says this is literally talking about sheepdogs. But something that might be enlightening to us in our modern culture is that in ancient time, dogs were not men's best friends. They were held in low esteem. This Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. They were held in low esteem. Nothing could be worse, could happen to a person than his body should be devoured by dogs. 1 Kings 14:11, 16:4 and following. So it says, Job 30 and verse 1 says, the youth who deride him, that he disdained to set their fathers with the dogs of his flock. And so, the point that Job is making about the fathers of these young men who are disrespecting him is that disrespecting him is, the shame really of these sons kind of goes back to the father, and that Job really would consider their fathers unworthy even of associating with his dogs.
I have just a kind of a
Sure.
random side question. Did like the Israelites or any people during this timeline, did they have like pets or whatever you want to call it? 'Cause
I don't think in the perspective that we had. I mean, we don't really ever read. We have Egyptians had cats. Were they pets? It might be the first indication of pets that I know of as Egyptians. I mean, they just looked at animals differently than we look at them. We look at, well, here's the ones you eat, and here's the ones you don't eat. You don't eat your pets, but you can eat these ones.
Yeah.
And there they just have all these animals.
It's just interesting to how the dog was considered back then and how it is today. And it's
Right.
like, well, did they have like pet cats or fish or?
Yeah. Well, I suppose in more study you might be able to figure that out, and that's one of those.
It's a random question.
No, I really don't know offhand. Okay, verse 2, Job says, indeed, what good was the strength of their hands to me? Vigor had perished from them. And so Job takes issue with these disrespectful younger men who have no right to mistreat Job, who is a righteous man. He says about these younger disrespectful men that they're worn out and too weak to work for him. And you'll find out why that they are in that position. Okay, verse 3 tells us, from want and famine they are gaunt, who gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation. So we think about what gaunt is, the idea of being extremely thin and bony.
Isn't it Gant?
What?
Isn't it pronounced Gant?
I pronounce it gaunt, but it could probably be that.
I've always heard of Gant.
Gant? I always heard it gaunt, but
That sounds like maybe the southern way. See that guy over there? He's pretty gaunt.
I say gaunt. I don't know. That's just how I say it. Job says that these younger men who were disrespecting him were miserable outcasts of society. They were on their own. The idea is their own community didn't want them. The idea they put them out, and so they're out on their own. They're malnutrition. That's why they're gaunt. And they were so desperate for food, they had to scavenge for food in the desert. Imagine sort of looking around and trying to find something sort of in a deserted area. Okay, it's not going to be that great. Verse 4, Job says, who pluck mallow by the bushes, and whose food is the root of the broom shrub. Now that sounds really tasty, but not really.
What's a mallow?
A mallow, so that's a good question. Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary talks about this. It says it's the shrub growing growing 5 to 10 feet high. It has thick succulent leaves and small purple flowers. The Hebrew word for mallow means salt plant. It thrived in dry, salty regions, especially around the Dead Sea. Although the leaves were sour and had little nutritive value, they were boiled and eaten by the poor in dire circumstances. So you can guess that this is probably not the first thing you're going to. In other words, well, we can always get some of that. And so he talks about the idea that they're plucking it, the idea is they're desperate for food. Then he talks about the broom shrub. So this one here, just a little bit about that. It comes from International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. It's a dense, twiggy bush, almost leafless, that grew to about 12 feet, has white blossoms. Common in the desert regions of Palestine, Arabia, and Egypt. It was used for charcoal. Provided shade for the prophet Elijah, 1 Kings 19:4 and 5. Sometimes you'll see it mentioned as a juniper in some translations. In the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, it says, among some of the same things, it says, and would be eaten only in case of the direst necessity. Do you want mallow, or do you want the broom from the broom brush? What do you think?
Neither one of them are high fancy dining.
You would choose between eating, grass or tree bark.
Yeah.
So you're just going to see that, it's sort of like, well, desperate times call for desperate measures. So one who is starving, extremely hungry, and desperation will eat almost anything to survive. And this is how these younger men were who had been mocking Job. They were just sort of fending for themselves. And so the idea is they ate what they could, but even what they ate, the idea is they were malnutrition. Verse 5, Job says they are driven from the community. They shout against them as against a thief. That's the community shouting against them. And so it's talking about those younger men that were mocking Job. These people, these younger men that were trouble for Job, were not welcome to live in the community. They were driven out. That's what the New American Standard says. And the idea is they were, Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon says, driven out, cast out, despised and miserable outcasts. The idea is they seem to be some kind of low-life guys. I mean, they just weren't welcomed in society because they didn't know how to behave. They were not godly men, so they were put out.
Would they be considered like the homeless kind of people?
Yep, that's exactly what it is. The idea is, now you're no longer welcome here. Find a home out there somewhere. Yeah, okay. That's exactly it. And we'll get into their accommodations here in a little bit. Those living in community were forced to leave permanently as those who are evil and unfit among them. The idea is the community was shouting as against a thief. This is somebody who's an evildoer. Here's somebody we don't want in our community. And so once they're put out, they're essentially homeless people. And so we get into their accommodations in verse 6 and 7. It says, so they dwell in dreadful valleys, in holes of the earth and of rocks. Among the bushes they cry out. Under nettles they are gathered together. Sounds like a happening place. So Job talks about this. They found shelter under whatever they could fine to protect them from the elements. They lived in caves and under cliffs. They took shelter in bushes and in nettles. And a nettle is, according to International Standard Bible, it's like a kind of weed. And according to a Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew Lexicon says it's a kind of weed and a shelter. International Standard Bible Encyclopedia talks about it, low thorny bushes, plentiful in association with these plants. That's the bushes. The idea is be careful when you get up from being done sleeping, because you probably get stabbed by all those those thorns that are in there. And so this is where they're sort of left, and they find themselves in these terrible conditions. And you'd think, well, how would people like this be in such awful conditions? You know, why would you be doing it to this older man? Why would you be so disrespectful to him? And so that's something that Job really doesn't get into, but we may entertain here shortly. Verse 8, Job says, fools, even those without a name, they were scourged from the land. And fools here, according to Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon, sort of the idea of foolish or senseless, especially of a man who has no perception of ethical and religious claims. And he says the idea is of ignoble. Ignoble means not deserving respect, or not noble or honorable. And then the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia denotes a wicked person, evil character, shamelessly immoral. So now we get a better idea why these guys aren't welcome. They're bad people. They don't deserve to be, they don't know how to behave. They don't know how to be good social people. So they're undeserving, and so the community just says, we don't want your kind here. You can leave here. And so with all that being said, and sort of kind of getting the character of these people, we're sort of surprised that they have the audacity to mock Job, who is a righteous man. But you see, even the community has sort of retracted from Job. They don't see Job as a righteous man. Job knows he's a righteous man, but because of his suffering, you see, he's somewhat suffering from the same sort of pushback, if you will, as these men are here. The idea that, you know, he's not really welcomed sort of among the community, because if God's punishing him, hey, you know, we're going to sort of keep our distance from this guy because we don't want that coming to us. Okay? So we might think about this as we get ready to start verse 9. Why these people? Now the writer of Job doesn't tell us why. Why do you think these people would sort of be harassing Job? And we'll see more of that in verses 9 and following.
Why do we think that they're harassing Job?
Job, yeah. I mean, Job's minding his own business. You know,
His situation is worse than theirs, apparently.
Yeah.
That would be my guess.
You know, as I thought about it, I'm thinking, you know, Job certainly is telling that this happened. And the only thing I can think of is that these were miserable people, and maybe the only thing that made them feel better about themselves was to turn their attention and really, you know, cut down and insult Job. And that's how some people are, even in society today. They don't have anything good to say about somebody. If they're jealous of them or they don't like them, they find words to sort of cut them down and to put them in their place. And in doing so, in a sick way, they feel better about themselves. And if I put somebody else down, then I can feel better about myself. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is sort of what's going on here, although it's not specifically said. Okay, if there's no questions or comments, go on to 9 to 15, Jenna, if you want to read verses 9 to 15.
Okay. And now I have become their taunt. I have even become a byword to them. They abhor me and stand aloof from me, and they do not refrain from spitting at my face. Because he has loosed his bowstring and afflicted me, they have cast off the bridle before me. On the right hand their brood arises. They thrust aside my feet and build up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path, they profit from my destruction, no one restrains them. As through a wide breach they come, amid the tempest they roll on. Terrors are turned against me, they pursue my honor as the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud.
All right. Okay. So, looking at this, the first part of it here, and now I have become their taunt. We're talking about those wicked younger men, the ones that are outcast society. And here, the word taunt, of course, we're talking about, saying unkind or insulting things. According to Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon, is a taunt song. So it's a song of mocking. The idea that they're singing some kind of song that's really insulting or mocking of Job. And if you can't really sort of appreciate so much what Job is saying here until you think about how bad Job feels. All of his children are dead. All of his wealth is gone. His wife told him to curse God and die, and we don't even see any mention of her comforting him or whatever. The three friends have told him he was a sinner. The community is not wanting anything to do with him. He's got boils. He's going through all this stuff. And to make things worse, here these guys are singing songs of taunt. And we can only imagine what they would say to this older man who, in the eyes of the community, has sort of lost all of his credibility. It's really a shame. A byword is sort of the idea of an object of talk. They become an object of talk. Concerning these younger men who are mocking Job, Don Shackelford, in his Truth for Today commentary in Job, this verse says, they hurled insults at the noble Job as he sat on the ash heap outside the city, scraping the pus from his sores. They considered him to be beneath them and expressed their contempt with rude gestures and outright abuse. And then quoting commentary, Homer Haley, Don Shackelford goes on and says, one cannot imagine a more obnoxious picture of a class of human scum than Job painted here. So it's sort of interesting how these characters sort of now come in the picture. And Job, for anybody who's really seen Job, the idea is they just can't even really understand really how bad things are. And Job has tried his best to explain that. In verse 10, Job continues. He says, they abhor me and stand aloof from me, and they do not refrain from spitting in my face. The NIV says, they detest me and keep their distance. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. Of course, abhor here is the idea of hate. They hate. And spitting in the face would be probably pretty similar today. And according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, it's a gesture of contempt, a deliberate insult. In other words, this is how much we look down upon you and how much we sort of want to disrespect you. So we think about that today and sort of thinking about, I should say, how Job must have felt, first of all, how Job must have felt in his mistreatment by these younger men in society. The idea is you have no right to do this. I haven't done anything wrong. But because the community sort of misjudged the situation, the idea is now he's suffering on top of his suffering. So taking a look at this situation and try to sort of bring some relevance today, what similarity do you see between Job and these outcasts to society with regard to Christians today?
I mean, it's kind of the direction that society sees Christians.
Okay, exactly. So we're making a connection. The idea is we're part of the community, but then if we don't stand in line with the community in terms of their values, their priorities, their morals, and all those things, we're not going to go through the same thing that Job went to. But the idea is we get insulted, we get mistreated in words. There's contempt and disrespect shown to Christians. Have they done anything wrong? Have we done anything wrong? Of course we haven't done anything wrong. If we've done wrong, we would deserve that. But if we essentially say, we want to follow Christ, we want to do what's right, what's good, we believe in the values and the priorities and the morals of the Bible, and for that we suffer, the idea is even though it's not right, we may have to endure that as righteous people today. Okay? Let's go on to verse 11 there. Job says, because he has loosened his bowstring and afflicted me, they have cast off their bridle before me. Now we sort of got to think about Job, who he's talking about here. We can just look at the translation and we can see the H on the word he is capitalized. So now we're moving to talk about God. Okay, that's what it's in mind. Why do these younger men who are outcast aside feel emboldened to mock Job? I liked what Dale Hesser in the Living Word series paperback on Job said. Says, quote, because God has let loose his arrow against Job and wounded him, and because God has wounded Job, these low people no longer bridle or restrain their affliction of him. In other words, they think God has sort of given what was coming to them. And even though they're in a pitiful situation, the idea is they feel sort of privileged, or they feel like some sort of right over Job, that they should essentially, mock him and put him down and spit on him and all these different things and mistreatment. Verse 12, Job says, on the right hand their brood arises, they thrust aside my feet and build up against me their ways of destruction. And so what Job is doing here is giving us graphic, figurative language in which he portrays himself as a city being attacked by a hostile army, which is the younger men who are outcasts of society that are mocking Job. So, the idea that he feels like God has sort of brought him to this situation, and now we have this invading army that are essentially, I'm in sort of this protected zone of my city, and the idea is they're sort of, they're breaking down the path. That's really the idea that Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon, the idea they're making it impassable, and that's one of the tactics that invading ancient armies used to do, to destroy roads, preventing escape of those living in walled city. And the idea here, if they profit from my destruction, perhaps means nothing more than they're making themselves feel better about themselves and putting Job down. Okay. No one restrains him, the last part of verse 13. Here Job expresses his deep hurt that he has because no one in the community, in other words, they're stuck in this. They've got to see this. Nobody in the community is doing anything to come to Job's defense and to stop it.
Including his friends.
Yeah, my friends. Where are my friends? Yeah. Okay, verse 14. As through a wide breach they come, amid the tempest they roll. And this is really continuing on in that graphic figurative language, this idea of your invading army. And Job indicates that it is as if the army has broken through the wall of his city, and now the hostile army is inside, and they're conquering the cities inside the city and all the inhabitants. Okay. Verse 15, Job says, terrors are turned against me. They pursue my honor as the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. And so what these young people are doing is really adding misery upon misery of Job's great suffering. You can sort of see why he's sort of frustrated and angry and upset with his friends and with God and everybody else, because all of this stuff is going on in his life. And we think about this from maybe a little bit bigger perspective. Many in the world, having gone through the loss of multiple family members, all their wealth, being afflicted with great bodily suffering, and left almost in isolation with no one to support him, people harassing them, might have committed suicide long ago. Okay, people, and suicide's no joke, but the idea is people have probably done it for a lot less than something that Job's went through. Yet Job does not do that. We know Job does not do this because ancients believed in the sanctity of life. In other words, all we see Job ever say is he asked God to take his life. In other words, he realized that he did not have authority over his life to do with it whatever he wanted. If he wanted to end it, that was his prerogative. He recognized the sanctity of life, that God is a giver of life, and that God also ultimately has prerogative over his all of those who he's created. And so Job does ask God to take his life, but God does not do it. So I'm going to ask you this question: why is suicide unnecessary and does not benefit the individual who wants to take their own life? Now we're looking at this from a spiritual perspective. Why
You're
would
going to end up in heaven if you do that? You're going, or paradise. You're going to end up in Hades.
Okay, so you're really committing self-murder. I mean, you know, people sometimes think, well, suicide's a different thing. Well, you know, if you murder somebody, you can go to prison for that. But if you murder yourself, you're going to be dead. You're not going to go to prison. But it's really the same act. So why is it definitely wrong if you kill somebody else, but if you kill yourself, somehow that's acceptable? I mean, a life is a life. You had no right to take this person's life. Why would you think it's okay to take your own life? Okay? And if we look at this even more in depth in terms of the Bible, one of the things we recognize is that in James chapter 1, 2, and following, that God allows us to go through trials in our life. Would you say that Job was going through a trial? Well, yeah, I would say he's going through a great trial. And so God does this. Why does God allow Christians to go through trials?
To test them and
Okay, there's really a test of their faith and really a strengthening of the faith. So the idea of suicide, if you're thinking, well, life is so bad, you get this tunnel vision, life is so bad, you know, things are so bad, you don't see anything in the future getting better. The idea is you're fixated on how bad things are, and the Bible gives you a different perspective. The perspective is, if you're a Christian, the idea is this experience, although unpleasant, is not designed to wash you out, but is designed in order to make you a stronger Christian. The Bible also indicates in 1 Corinthians 10:13 that God never gives us more than we can handle. So are you going to listen to the voices in your head saying, oh, I can't handle it, I'm past my limit, I can't take anymore? Or are we going to listen to what the Word of God says? The idea is God doesn't give us more than we can handle. And when we look at this, the idea that suicide is not necessarily the answer to all of life's problems. In other words, that's your way of sort of escaping. And if you don't recognize that problems can be, for Christian, the idea of trials, the idea of something that strengthens you, you look at it that way, suicide is short-sighted. Why? Because all you see is right now. And all you see, really look in the future, is the same picture. The problem is you're not omniscient. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. You're making an assumption. The assumption is it's never going to get better. Well, you don't know that. So you are really acting upon your own belief that by ending it's better, because you don't see any improvement going in the future. Imagine if Job would have committed suicide. Just imagine that would be. Okay, if we're familiar with the book, we know that Job comes out on the other side, a very blessed man. God is very proud of Job. Yeah, Job has made some mistakes in how he portrayed God. And he sort of forgot his place a little bit, but ultimately he maintained the integrity of his faith. If Job commits suicide, essentially it really gives the victory to the devil. Because the idea is that, here's a man that was not willing to go through whatever it is to sort of prove his point that, he's only serving you for the blessings. So if Job committed suicide, the idea is that Job would have never saw his situation turn around and the blessings. If he had done that, he'd have been in the moment. All he had was limited view of the future. He would have never saw that. That is a reminder that we don't know the future. And the future, actually, God considerably brighter for Job. It also says those who can consider suicide, they don't trust God, but instead trust their own thinking and judgments. In other words, trusting in God in terms of all the things we've talked about. The idea is, here's what God says about trials and about, what he allows us to go through. And the idea that trials aren't made to make us weaker, to wash up, but to strengthen us. And Job's case is something that really can be something for anyone sort of thinking about suicide to consider. God will help all of those who are in Christ, who are faithful, to be victorious in the end. So what if my situation with the Christian life, what if it never gets better this life? What would you tell them?
It'll be better in the next life.
It's going to be better in the next life, and the next life is forever. And this life is temporary. Very good. Let's jump into verses 16 through 23. So Ryan, if you wouldn't mind reading that, please.
And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have seized me. At night it pierces my bones within me, and my gnawing pains take no rest. But a great force my garment is distorted. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. He has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry out to thee for help, but thou dost not answer me. I stand up, and thou dost turn thy attention against me. Thou hast become cruel to me. With the might of thy hand thou dost persecute me. Thou dost lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride, and thou dost dissolve me in a storm. For I know that thou wilt bring me to death, and to the house of meeting for all living.
All right. So here Job now wrestles with his present reality of great suffering. He turns his attention really squarely to God and describes the agony he is experiencing at the hand of God. And I think this is one of the sad things that Job doesn't. Job sort of believes that God is unfairly treating him and allowing him to suffer. But he doesn't have the knowledge. He doesn't have anyone say, listen, no, Job, you're in a real good place with God. And you know what? God loves you. And God, out of all the people, could have chose someone else. Out of all the people to prove Satan wrong, he chose you. What an honor, what a privilege. But see, he doesn't have any of that. And all he has is what society typically believes in, and his knowledge that, listen, I know I'm not guilty of what they're saying. I know it's a different picture. So Job says in verse 16, and now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have seized me. And this is something similar to what the psalmist said in Psalm 42, verses 3 and 4, part A. He says, my tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember, and I pour out my soul within me. And the idea of pouring out his soul is really despondency, or a strong feeling of unhappiness caused by the difficulties which you feel you cannot overcome, or the idea of hopelessness. Job is in real pain, emotional, physical, psychological. Job doesn't understand this. And because he doesn't understand why God is allowing this, he is really struggling with all of his emotions and all these things, because as much as he has sort of pleaded with God to get an answer about this, or to have his day in court with God, he hears nothing. Okay, verse 17, Job says, at night it pierces my bones within me, and my gnawing pains take no rest. So the idea here, Job is describing the intensity of his bodily pain. This is no joke. This, we think Job sitting in ashes, he scratches up pottery. This is pretty bad. This is real bad. And, he talks about, piercing here, and according to Brown Driver's Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon, it's about the idea of boring my bones, the idea of boring or picking or digging in relation to the idea of this pain that is getting him. The idea of a gnawing pain is something that continues to sort of bite or chew at him, and which it sort of leaves him with no rest. How can you rest if you're in that kind of pain? And so, we think, well, Job, you shouldn't be so hard on God. You shouldn't say that when we put ourselves in the man's place, we can probably think, man, that'd be a really tough place to be. And if you're not getting an answer from God, Job isn't thinking about leaving God. He's just frustrated. And he doesn't understand, God, you could just tell me this. And then at least in this experience, I could sort of understand why I'm going through this. Verse 18, Job says, by a great force my garment is distorted. It binds me about as a collar of my coat. And Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon is talking about his garment here is disguised, no longer looks like clothing. And so Job is saying that his garment or clothing has become disfigured. Now Job doesn't tell us how it becomes disfigured. What would your guess be?
Rolling around and kind of stretching it maybe?
Okay, well, the idea that he's sitting in ashes. He's got boils all over. So if he's scratching it and stuff is oozing out and getting all icky, sorry about that, we can sort of understand why, his clothes might look really icky after a while. Is because of all of the stuff with his skin and everything sort of is affecting his clothes. So Job doesn't say how it happened, but that's probably because of the pus and the sores and all of the things that are going on with his skin. He says, it binds me about as a collar of my coat. What Job means here by this phrase is difficult to understand. Other than a collar, is talking about the tunic worn underneath next to the skin and under the outer garment. Any questions about that? Verse 19, Job says, he has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. Again, this is sort of Job talking figuratively, how he feels God has treated him. And so the idea is he feels that God has sort of cast him aside. Mire, of course, is talking about sort of wet, soggy, muddy ground. The idea that, God has just sort of discarded him. And if he becomes like dust and ashes, he becomes something sort of unimportant to God. Verse 20, Job says, I cry out to thee for help. He's crying out to God. But thou dost not answer me. I stand up, and thou dost turn thy attention against me. Now remember, Job has this in mind that God is outright rejecting him. Outright does not want anything to do with him. So what he is thinking does not square sort of with reality. Job is a righteous man, as we point out. We know in Proverbs 15:29 that God hears the prayers of the righteous. Yet what Job prayed for was not granted by God. And so I ask you this question: what caution do you see for us as faithful Christians in praying to God? Here's a guy that's faithful. He prayed, yet he didn't get what he prayed for. So how would we explain that as faithful Christians praying today and we don't necessarily get what we're praying for?
It's because in the end, it's not what we want, it's what God wants for us.
Okay, so we're talking about a higher priority and a higher will than ours. Ours always makes the most sense because we thought of it as sort of a fix or something we need. We thought of it within ourselves. We're thinking, God, this is a perfect fit. Let me send this up to you. If you give this to me, this is like the perfect answer. Everything will be great. Problem is that we're finite in our thinking and understanding. God is infinite. And if God can sort of see the entirety of our life and all the things we're going to do, our experiences, what we have yet to go through in life, ultimately there may be a better thing in mind than what we thought of. Our problem is that we're kind of selfish because we think what we come up with is the best plan. We think it makes the most sense. Yet we don't recognize that we need to leave room for the will of God, and that God's will is supposed to have the higher priority in our life. Sometimes what we ask for, God is certainly going to give it to us, not because it's as good as the idea that he thought of or anything like that, but the idea is it actually is in harmony with his will. And so if it's in harmony with his will, God is going to do that. Sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers immediately, which means we have to be patient. And we have to really except how God is going to answer that maybe sometime later in the future. Our problem too many times is, one of my Bible professors says, is we have lots and lots of prayers that we ask, and we're sometimes wonder, what did God do about all these things? And so he sort of challenged the students to sort of say, when you say a prayer, you write on this side of the page things I prayed for, and then as they get answered, you fill in the second line. And then what you're going to see is, oh yeah, I prayed for this on this, got answered here, or I prayed for this on this other day, and here's what I got plus this on this day. And so the idea is that it really draws your attention to really think about, wow, God is busy. I mean, he hears our prayers. The idea is not beyond listening, but the idea is he's going to answer our prayer, but it has to be with his agenda being the highest priority, whatever that may be. Any questions or comments about that? Okay, verse 21. Job says, thou hast become cruel to me. With the might of thy hand thou dost persecute me. Again, he's talking to God. And the NIV says, you turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand you attack me. And this really sounds a little bit even more, pronounced in terms of God's treatment of him. Job is in frustration. He's in pain. He's desperate. And in that, he is really making a serious charge against God. He believes God is who he is and all the power he has, and that ultimately humans should live according to God's will. But he just believes that God used to be his friend, and now he's turned into a tyrant who's oppressing him. I mean, how sad would that be? Just because you don't understand. You're like, you're not acting like you used to act. And here's sort of what I walk away with. Here's what I'm left with. And nobody can tell him, Verse 22, Job says, thou dost lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride, and thou dost dissolve me in a storm. And I liked what Albert Barnes said here in Barnes' notes in the book of Job. He says, quote, God caused Job to melt away, as it were, with terrors and alarms. He was like one caught up in a whirlwind and driven along with storm, and who in such circumstances would be dissolved with fear. Verse 23, Job says, for I know that thou wilt bring me to death and to the house of meeting for all living. Okay, so Job knows that all of mankind eventually dies. It's a common fate. The Hebrew writer said, Hebrews 9:27, and inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes the judgment. So what is Job really trying to say here? Well, here's two possibilities. Some of this is very difficult. Again, we're using a lot of poetic language in these verses. The first possibility is that either that God will be the cause of an early death, or second, more likely that God will cause Job to remain in his present condition until death. It's just a hard verse to really figure out exactly what Job means. Okay, is there any questions about that? Okay, we're going to go into the last part. Jenna, would you read 24 through 31, please?
Yet does not one in a heap of ruin stretch out his hand, or in his disaster therefore cry out for help? Have I not wept for the one whose life is hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? When I expected good, then evil came. When I waited for light, then darkness came. I am seething within and cannot relax. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning without comfort. I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I have become a brother to jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black on me, and my bones burn with fever. Therefore my harp is turned to mourning, and my flute to the sound of those who weep.
All right. Well, he's a bunch of joy and fun. Now, Job is, these last verses of chapter 30, Job will describe how alone he has felt in his great suffering. Absolutely no one was there to support Job in his suffering. These verses should help us really as Christians to think about the importance of supporting one another in times of trial. In other words, that's when we need each other most of all. The idea that we're thinking about somebody who's going through something, we're thinking, I can't be so busy that I don't have time to sort of minister to those who are in trial or in mourning or whatever the case may be. Verse 24, Job says, "Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, or in his disaster therefore cry out for help." Now, again, we're running into difficulty trying to understand this. So I look up a lot of the words, the Hebrew words. I look at commentaries. I mean, this one says this and this one says. A lot of times you see a lot of consistency that sort of really helps you. When you see lots of inconsistency, wow, this, then we're sort of left to try to understand it. So, it's hard to understand exactly what Job means in the specifics of these words he uses in verse 24. However, what does become clear is the overall meaning, which is no one has been there to support Job in his great suffering, not his three friends, no one else in the community, and including God. Nobody, I mean, he's just by himself. So you can imagine how down and out, that he must feel. Verse 25, have I not wept for those whose life is hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? So maybe somebody could say, if you're not going to be there for me in my time of need, when you get there, forget it. But nobody's going to be able to say this to Job, okay? Because Job was a friend indeed. He was there for others to support them in troubles and suffering, and his thinking is what?
They'll support me.
Remember me? I'm the guy that came and was with you when you were mourning the loss of this one, when you were going through all this. Where's my support? The idea is he must have been devastated. All these people. In other words, he's not bragging about what he did, but he's essentially saying, doesn't that mean something to you? It should, because I essentially put myself out there to help you. And what do I get in return? Nothing. Verse 26, Job says, when I expected good, then evil came. When I waited for light, then came darkness. So Job supported others in suffering. He expected others would be there for him, but he was wrong. So is the meaning of this verse here in verse 26. Verse 27, Job says, I am seething within. I cannot relax. Days of affliction comfort me. So Job is describing his inner turmoil he is experiencing in his great suffering. Job does not like what he's going through. He does not understand why he's suffering. His friends aren't there for him. And his suffering looks like it's going to go on forever. Verse 28, Job says, I go about mourning without comfort. I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. John E. Hartley in the book of Job from the New International Commentary on this verse says, quote, since Job would have been barred from the public assembly because of his disease, the language of the second line of this verse is figurative to describe his resolve in lamenting publicity on the ash heap. The Amplified Bible on this verse here, this is a different verse here, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. Verse 29, Job says, I have become a brother to jackals and a companion of ostriches. The Amplified Bible says, I am a brother to jackals which howl, and a companion to ostriches which scream dismally. And so it seems when he's claiming this association with these animals that I too am an animal is not something what he's trying to say, but it appears the commonality with the jackals and ostriches is in relation to sort of their mournful cries for help. Verse 30, Job says, my skin turns black on me and my bones burn with fever. Well, guess what? Job is pretty much nothing but skin and bones. We use that phrase these days. His skin looks black probably because of all of the skin issues, all of the stuff that's going on with him, the scraping, the oozing, all that stuff, and it has blackened in color. The second phrase, and my bones burn with fever, the idea has to be that his body, skin and bones, the idea is I'm burning with fever. So this, again, so Job's bodily affliction is great too. Verse 31, Job finishes, therefore my harp is turned to mourning, and my flute to the sound of those who weep. Usually those instruments are used a lot of times with weddings, joyous occasions, but not for Job. And Wayne Jackson, in his book, the Book of Job, says, quote, Job's happy times are turned to heartache, his life has become one long funeral-like event. Any questions? All right, I want to thank those who've joined us on the video tonight. Lord willing, we'll be here a week from now on Wednesday. Thank you. God bless you.